the desire to better organize industrial cooperation. One other element which needs to be taken in account is the rooted connections of the Italians rather than the Italian state to the Levant, which goes back centuries, and the expression in Italian of Mare Nostrum is still very much used. If one walks around in downtown Beirut, fortunately, as a tourist, that's more easy nowadays than as a Lebanese, I think. The neighborhood of Le Quartier de l'Étoile really reminds of neighborhoods in Ravenna or in Padua, for example. Let's not forget that the hotels which were on the seashore of the city in the 19th century.
Had problem with Zoom, but we fixed it. Now we have people. Can you, in a few sentences, just to say specifically about the Catholic meeting, etc., just to be able that to join you.
The first part, you mean?
Yeah. Just a few words.
Because, okay, sure. And sorry for the audience. So very quickly, the policy of Italy is more difficult to define, but the policy of the Vatican is extremely coherent. It was the first country to officially espouse a conspiracy theory that goes back to the 29th of March 2011. It did it before Iran or Russia or even Hezbollah here in Lebanon. And that was based on the Synod of the Catholic Bishops for the Middle East, which was organized from the 10th to the 24th of October 2010, so a couple of months before the start of the Arab Spring. And in that Synod, the idea is to follow or to support the local governments. So even in the case of Syria, the Catholic Church was very quick in deciding to support whatever the regime would do, because that had been decided at that synod. I've talked about the relationship between Italy and the United States. I mentioned different cases of tension, one could say, the question of Palestine, the question of the hijacking of the Achille Lauro ship, the government of Giulio Andreotti at the beginning of the 70s taking the destiny of Italy as an actor in the Middle East, or at least at the Mediterranean, in his own hands. That happens in the framework of the defeat of the Americans in Vietnam. The interest for the Italian government officially was to protect themselves. That's why they allowed the PLO, sorry, to have ambassadors in Italy, and there was a students' union which was set up, but probably it was much more an idea of regional expansion of influence because France had lost the upper hand. There was a question of the industrial cooperation, the importance of Italians historically in this region, which goes back centuries. Just to come back to the question of the fascist government of the 20s and 30s, it was the last, it was an important episode of investment on local partners for Italy, and one finds that idea also present in nowadays Italian policy. The Vatican was of course has been through quite some difficult times in the last 2 centuries, one could say. The collapse of the Spanish Empire was worrisome for it. You had the question of the French Revolution, of course, but it was very happy to invest on Lebanon from the start of the 19th century. It managed to strengthen itself in this region while losing Italy with the unification of Italy in 1870. And the Catholic Church had to fight hard for its survival as a main actor in Spain in the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. So when the Catholic Church or the Pope relates to the Middle East or to Lebanon or Syria in specific, it's an actor which has been investing in this region for a couple of centuries, and that's different from Italy. Italy has had more of a diverse set of factors to take in consideration. One Italian actor which is very well known, everyone has heard about it, is the National Fuel Trust, the ENI, which exploits, of course, gas and petroleum. In the case of Syria or even Lebanon, they are not extremely active. They're more interested in Egypt, for example. Still, the company is very alive in cultural life in Italy itself. You'll perhaps see there is some publicity in the number of OSs which I've of any which I've just shared with you, and they also produce these kind of publicity leaflets, which is a way of showing how much they are connected to the region, to the developments in the region. And they were even sponsoring a meeting back in 2011 on the Syrian Opera, on the Arab Spring, given by a leftist newspaper, Il Manifesto, back in Rome. So Eni is an actor also in terms of cultural development back in Italy. Let's not forget that the general director of Eni has been killed in '62, probably by the French, because he was trading with Algeria, which had just got its independence. But in the case, again, of Syria and Lebanon, Eni is perhaps not the main element to focus on. The question of competition or altercation between Italy and France is a main element. We'll see that back with the UNIFIL contingent, which is deployed in Lebanon. When Italy gains, it's because France has lost, basically. And that, in a way, goes back to the slap of Tunisia, which happened in April-May 1881, when France took Tunisia as a colonial domain, in disrespect of what Italy or the new Italian government wanted to do. And that's a reason why the Italian states joined Austria and Germany in the alliance before the First World War. So there is this real competition between Italy and France. And one can see that even quite recently with the question of the open Viking ship, which was sent by Giorgia Meloni from Italy to have its migrants on board disembarked in France on the 8th of November 2022. France was important in the region under de Gaulle, of course. He helped, or let's say this French state helped the waging of the war by Israel in '67, and the whole question of playing into the expectations of the Arab population with this Arab policy has much more hidden sides to it than what is normally acknowledged. One of the crucial moments, one could say, that France was ejected from its role in the region is the bombing by Israel of the airplanes, or the airport of Beirut on the 28th of December '68, which was a clear message of Israel to France: we don't need you anymore. After that, as I said, in the '70s, Italy is going to take on a much more important role under the government of Andreotti and Craxi further on. one example of this exchange of roles, or let's say of subsequent entry of the Italians, is a question of UNIFIL, what I just mentioned. There was this proposal by Romano Brody in 2006 to radically increase the amount of soldiers deployed or forces deployed in the south of Lebanon to operate as a buffer between Israel and well, the actors in southern Lebanon, mainly Hezbollah. And his proposal was that the 15 Italians the amount of Italians would increase from 50 to 3,000. Whereas the French had their forces reduced from 1/5 to less than 14%. And especially important is that the Italians still now have both control of the Lebanese coast. So the Italian forces are the ones on the coast. And one knows even recently the importance of that when it comes to the gas agreements between Lebanon and Israel. And 2/3 of the commanders of the UNIFIL battalion are Italian commanders. In the case of Romano Brody, I'll just mention this quickly. He was a fundamental actor in strengthening the role of Italy back then in 2006. And he came out publicly on the 2nd of October 2015. So that's just a week basically after the intervention of Russia, to call Italy, but in general the international community, to reintegrate Bashar al-Assad. So one can see that, I mean, he was not in power anymore, but he's still an authoritative voice in the Italian landscape. There is, I mean, we'll get into more examples of Italian state policy. First, I would mention again about the relationship, or let's say the independence or the possibility of an independent foreign policy on the part of Italy. That there is a notorious underground world of CIA activities from Italy and in Italy, which include attacks against workers' movements in Italy, the Glaudio and Stay Behind operative sections, and this connection to an international outreach, this international Italian outreach, has been shown by someone like Paolo Emiliodaviani, who was from Genoa, and who was responsible of a lot of Italian ministries after the Second World War. And of course, it has been supported by, I mean, this connection with the United States was supported by Berlusconi's government in particular, but Berlusconi back then operated with Putin and Erdogan too, because he was fond of the high level of institutional collaboration. At the same time, you have a push from below in Italy, in Italian society, for accountability. And in 2007, Prodi, the second Prodi government, reorganized the Secret Service agencies in Italy. So there is some kind of shift in the options, what the connection with the CIA is concerned in Italy. One important case was the killing of Sismi operative Nicola Calipari in Iraq. He was responsible, I mean, as a secret, I mean, as an agent for the Italian state, for the liberation of an Italian journalist, Giuliana Sgrena. And they were just basically, well, attacked on the way to the airport of Baghdad by the American military. So the Americans still behave in a very well, can still behave, especially in Iraq, in a very aggressive manner. But one sees that there are cases in which Italy shows some kind of independent approach. Another element which is important to have in mind is that there are really excellent academics in Italy who are very connected to what's happening in Syria and in Lebanon. I would like to mention Antonino Pellitteri, who worked in Palermo. Also because I mean he's of course a profound and competent scholar on the field of the Middle East. I would say less so on the recent period, and he has taken a very strong political standpoint on his, for example, on his Facebook page. He used to work in Sicily, in Palermo, and he's really on the side of the Syrian regime. And he made a strong denouncement of the Italian government's aid given to Syria in the recent period following the earthquake in northern Syria, criticizing the fact that this aid was going through Lebanon. So academics of like Pellitteri are very active also on the field of political well, opposition, one could say, ideological opposition to what the policy of Italy is, which is, if when it comes to the question of aid, which is very mainstream. But that shows that the whole debate of what relationship should there be between Italy and Syria is very actual nowadays in Italy. So again, when one mentions the Western policy the Italian state would be following, it should be nuanced because it's much more complex than just following the playbook of the United States or someone else. And there is a real international instinct among the Italian population and also the public servants on what the relationship can be with the outside world. This community of civil servants of Italy working in the foreign foreign affairs can also, you know, rely on an important community of Levantini, so the population of Italian descent, who lives, which lives here in the region. There is the case, for example, of Laura Mirakian, who was ambassador in Damascus at the beginning of the years 2000, of course, of Armenian origin, and well, who was an important figure in the Italian State Department. And the Italian state has also been very eager to give out in an easy manner nationalities or passports. There is a case, for example, of the Jewish population which could work through, could work through the administration in Livorno after the nationalizations in Egypt. So this allows the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs to strengthen itself because it incorporates masses of very competent people. In a way, this question of the Levantini could be compared to what the network of the international network of the Orthodox families were in the Ottoman period. They are a backbone of the Italian policy in the Arab world, which is built on centuries of discrete international networking and not organized with one centralized state vision. Then you have the amount of what I've called the legend of grassroots Italian travelers and citizens, which strongly identify straightforward with the countries in which they travel to. It's a proof of a common history between the Italian population and the locals in the Bilad al-Sham. Other Westerners are more strongly conditioned, probably by what their nations of origin have as a policy. It's interesting because there is a complicated relationship between the Italian state and these nationals. These nationals can rely on the administrative apparatus of the Italian state, but not much more than that. The embassies are not that useful. I mean, I heard from colleagues back in at the beginning of the Arab Spring that the embassies were basically non-operative. So that could be compared in a way to the difficulties the Lebanese population has to relate to its institutions. Italy has a feeble state, but after the Second World War, the Americans invested on the Christian Democrats, as they did in Germany, in West Germany, as their partners, political partners for the country. There is a real question about what the independence of this Democrazia Cristiana and Arab policy has been under even under the American influence. And of course, the Socialist Party, which came to power in the 80s with Craxi, even gave Italy even more independence toward the United States. Let's not forget that the United States itself has contradictory policies when it comes to the Middle East. There are spaces which open between different American presidencies or presidents, and also actors like the CIA or economic actors in the region have sometimes clashed with what the official policy of the United States is. I would just give one simple example of that. At the beginning of the Ramadan War, Yom Kippur War in October 73, the government of then Richard Nixon didn't decide immediately on supporting Israel, whereas Kissinger, who was Secretary of State back then, and had overseen the coup in Chile on the 11th of September, worked strongly together with the CIA and the Dutch government to support Israel immediately on the 8th of October. So there was a real debate inside the American government on which stance to take in the Ramadan War. I mean, originally the stance of the United States was neutrality, as it had been, for example, in the case of the Suez War. But Kissinger, together with the Dutch government and the CIA, organized the sending of NATO material hardware from the south of Holland to Israel. Israel tried to have a counteroffensive on the 8th of October. That didn't succeed, and that's when the Americans began a real air bridge into the Sinai. So, I mean, that's a general picture, let's say, of how Italy is related to the region until the recent developments. I would just, if you agree, I will just briefly focus on the better focus on the relationship between the Italian government or the Italian state and the Catholic Church, because it's an aspect which is underestimated. To a large extent, I suppose. I believe so. When the Italian state was created in 1870, it was done in opposition to the papal states. Pius IX declared himself as a political prisoner of the Italian state. He didn't recognize the Italian state. He asked Catholics not to engage in politics. In 1875, the work of the Congress of the Catholic Committees was set up to put forward socially Catholic ideas and demands. So the Catholic Church from the beginning on in Italy after unification of the country has its own ideas, but doesn't have the power anymore. Then there is a very important element to consider in a factor to consider in the recent history of Italy, which is its social movements and its protest movements and the left. And that is basically what is going to bring the Catholic Church back into back into power, one could say, because already at the end of the 19th century, the liberals want to close the left, so the socialists, anarchists, ask the Catholics back into politics. That creates a split among the Catholics. On the one side, one has the Catholic democratics who are more on the side of social movements, and you have the uncompromiseful part of the Catholic Church, which is really which sticks to the idea that any socialist movement is wrong. The Congress, which I'd mentioned, will be disbanded in July, on the 28th of July, 1904. So that is the end of the first phase, let's say, of political of institutional involvement by the Catholic Church in Italy. A second stage starts in 1909 with Pius X creating the Italian Catholic Electoral Union. And then on the 18th of January 1919, there is this Italian Popular Party, which is set up again against the socialist movement together with the liberals. This Catholic political independence is sacrificed by Pope Pius XI to pave the way for the 1929 Lateranense agreement with Mussolini. And that's a really important element, because with this agreement with the fascist regime, the Catholic Church is not on the driver's seat, but it's really it's back in power. So then you have the regime of Mussolini, of course. It's a period in which the Catholic Church develops itself. Then in 1944, in the south of Italy, under the guidance of the Americans, the Democrazia Cristiana is created. It's US-oriented. It has a recollection of the anti-socialist policy of the Italian Popular Party, and doesn't want any industrial policy. For Italy, is in favor of liberalism, corruption. In favor of corruption. It encourages corruption, and laissez-faire, and it's very much favoring emigration of Italian labor force. This new trend of international and institutional, as an international institutional actor, is not going to be shattered by the Vatican II Council in the 60s. So, the Vatican II Council is, of course, to be considered as as a milestone in the history of the Catholic Church, but as an international actor, and in the case of Lebanon, that's quite obvious, it builds on what has already been constructed before that. In the south of Italy, the Catholic Church will work together with the mafia, and this whole setup of political power will begin will be shaken in the 80s, where the Democrazia Cristiana will really be compromised. And of course, everyone knows of the Operation Mani Pulite in 1992, which will bring an end to this or the First Republic in Italy. An interesting element of involvement of the Catholic Church or the continuity of the involvement of the Catholic Church in Lebanon is, of course, the ordination of Charbel Makhlouf as a well, I mean the beginning of the process of beatification, which happens on the 5th of December 65. So it's really in the closing days of the Vatican II Council. With Pope John Paul II, the Vatican is going to even more directly take over as an actor internationally and institutionally inside Italy. There is a new concordato which is established in '84 between the Italian state and the Vatican. It's more advantageous economically, and one of the so the fundamental element is the opposition to the left, and that is something which goes on until the day of today. The left used to be very strong in Italy. I mean, it's not so much the case anymore, but it used to be a real actor in Italy. I mean, governments after the unification of Italy some governments were really left oriented. One of the problems, of course, of entering discussing the policies of the Catholic Church in the region is the language they use, and the secrecy and the Latin categories one can find back in their documents. So it's not they don't really have a policy of openness as other state actors have. I will just. I think there are. I'm just trying to have an idea about the time. What's the? Still 5? Okay, only 5 minutes. Okay. I'll just give two very clear indications about the way in which Italian states and Catholic Church have worked together in the case of Syria. There is the question of humanitarian corridors established on the 22nd of June 2014. I mean, that was basically quite soon after the offensive of Daesh towards Iraq. And this humanitarian corridors is an option given to some refugees to flee the region and to establish themselves in Italy. One other case which needs to be mentioned is, of course, the kidnapping of Padre Paolo Dall'Olio, Italian national. He was kidnapped in Raqqa on the 29th of July 2013. He's a Jesuit. He started, he brought back to life the monastery Der Marmousa al-Habashi in the province in Rif Dimashq. And he did that in '82, was ordained priest in '84. And this monastery, I'm sure you've all heard about it, was focused not only on prayer, manual work, and hospitality, but also on dialogue with the Muslim community. He played a really important role inside the Christian community in Syria, but also more broadly with the population of Syria and internationally. He wrote a book which was a real issue for the Catholic Church called "In Love with This." I mean, this is the translation of the title, "In Love with Islam, Believing in Jesus." He was convened to the Propaganda Fide in Rome as a consequence, because they wanted to make sure of the authenticity of his faith. And the reason why I want to mention his case is because the Italian state has adopted, so of course, he's an Italian national, he's been abducted, so we don't know if he's still alive or not. but he also belongs to the Catholic Church. So it's a perfect case of the two actors, Italian state and the Vatican, having to work out the situation together. And it's really different. The reaction of the Italian government is really different from the case of Giulio Regeni, who was killed in Egypt on the 25th of January 2016, where the Italian government was free, basically, to react. I mean, one wouldn't say that the reaction of the Italian government has been extremely harsh, but there was a real clash of intentions with the Egyptian government. In the case of Padre Paolo, when one really has a feeling that the Italian government has stepped aside and leaves the destiny of the case in the hands of the church. And an example of that is that they received in 2014 already some personal belongings belonging to Padre Paolo, but these were given to the family of Padre Paolo in Rome only at the beginning of 2018. And it's a real question of, I mean, the reason why the Italian government has kept the information they have about the case of Padre Paolo for secret for so long. The financial revenues of the Catholic Church go back to the agreement with the fascist regime. So the Catholic Church manages to invest in projects and in its own development thanks to the agreement of the Patti Lateranensi. Yeah, I mean, there is another aspect, of course, I'll just very quickly mention that, which is the political instability of Italy since 2006. You have different governments. There are quite a significant number of elections. There is a lot of institutional upheaval, also with the appearance of a political movement like the Five Star Movement. And the interesting point is that the Italian government, as I've said, has a complex policy of foreign policy because it has to manage different interests, of course, but has a real intelligence to manage this. It is capable of having a stable, quite cynical approach to the region. They go for status quo. They're interested in making business. I mean, a lot of European countries think like that. I mean, Germany too, for example. They don't really want a big upheaval in the region. In that sense, the question of the Arab Spring was not looked at very favorably. And the Catholic Church has a more conservative approach. There is this organization which was put up in September 2014 in defense of Christians. It was put together. I mean, they had their first meeting in Washington D.C. in the United States, and they really believe that the Christians in the Middle East face a danger of extension of annihilation, and their idea is there is no possible relationship with other communities here. So the Catholic Church has a soul of conservatism when it comes to the presence in the region, whereas the Italian government is more pragmatic but cynical, and they probably follow more the interests of the Catholic Church when it comes to the region than solely the interests of the United States, for example, or of the European Union. I think I'll leave it with, I mean, I'll leave it here. One real important aspect, however, is that history gives incredible tools to understanding the present situation, the present dynamics. And well, of course, the Middle East is as rich as it is. The Middle East is as rich as it is because you have so many different actors which are able to develop their own policy. I mean, I've not explained much of it, but in the book I've written on Syria, especially the second volume, I've really tried to identify 14 major or 15 major actors on the Syrian scenario, which transform the equilibrium between the actors. I mean, one amazing aspect of the Syrian question is that the foreign actors who intervene don't clash. I mean, they're rarely clashing. There are some occasions of fights between two actors, but the real constant element is that they've partitioned the country. Each of them has their own section of the region of the territory, and having the courage to analyze all of these elements and put them in perspective with the information history gives is essential, I believe, for really understanding what the dynamics are. But it's a real problem in Italy too. It's not only a problem in Lebanon. Italy lacks the courage, or the Italian academics lack the courage to ask what is exactly the interaction between the international actors. They're still very much focused on, you know, geopolitics and classical schemes. And I think that demonstrating or going back to the facts and the events, and that's really what I've done with the second volume, is necessary to draw a different picture of how the different actors relate when it comes to the Bilad al-Sham.
Thank you so much. Joan, and I think you draw a very complex table of a relationship from one side where religion, politics heavily intervene, and this is really what struck me so much about the Catholic Church position about the Arab uprising, and particularly about Syria, but also how Italy positioned itself vis-a-vis the French, the France. Also, it's very interesting how you draw it historically. So I will open the floor to any questions. Myself, I have 2 questions, but I will first. Yeah, Tarek, please.
Thank you very much for the talk. I was wondering about the role of the Catholic Church and the kinds of stances it takes as far as issues of the Middle East are concerned. Now, you seem to suggest very early on in your talk, and then later when you systematically discussed Catholic policy, the Vatican policy, that basically the Catholic Church, the Vatican specifically, takes its cue from local actors, local Christians, i.e. the Synod of Eastern Bishops. To what extent is it true that the Vatican is entirely dependent on its Eastern bishops in order to formulate policy on the Middle East? And to what extent is it possible that there could be disagreements? And the reason I ask this question is because, for example, in the case of the civil war in Lebanon, there were very clear disagreements between the Vatican at the time with Popes Paul VI and then John Paul II. and they were very much at loggerheads with the Maronite Church. Not that it was necessarily a very public thing, but there were definitely different stances taken by the Vatican as opposed to the Maronite Church, and as far as internal politics in Lebanon and the ongoing civil war at the time were concerned. And one scholar who has written extensively about this is a British guy by the name of Alexander Henley, I think. So I wonder, in the case of Syria, whether the Vatican has kind of resorted to completely taking its cue from the Synod of Eastern bishops, or whether there is a more complex story to be told. Thank you.
I would like to follow up on these questions. I think if I will draw parallel between Christian community in Palestine and Christian community in Syria, I would say that there is a heavy rupture between the Orthodox, for instance, Orthodox leadership and the Palestinian community, the Orthodox community. So this is, if you like, where the concept of, instead of talking about Catholic community, or because I'm interested to see how this scaled down to the population. To use a concept of like political Maronite. I don't know who invented this during the Civil War. Sadiq Jalal Azm, for instance, he used about political Alawite. And I think this concept is really very important, is to say we are not talking about the community, the Alawite community. But he argued that there is a political Alawite, a doctrine, that orient this that time of the crisis, the war, the uprising, the civil war, whatever you would like to call it, about Syria. So I'm interested to see whether there is, in your opinion, we can talk about political Catholics on Syria, because we see how the community is divided. If you like, you have many leaders, Michel Kilo and others in the opposition, but also we know that there is a population that they have this imaginary of secularism. I think, if you like, this is a problem. All my conversation in France, for instance, from very beginning of the Arab uprising, they're imaginary. They talk about Hosni Mubarak, about Zain al-Abidin, about Bashar al-Assad, as a secular. Like a magical word which allow everything. Once you identify as a secular, that anything is better than any alternative that we don't know what is going on. So this is my second question about the imaginary, if you like. Why the Catholic senates, these meetings, you talk about it in the very early stage of the Arab uprising, they took position in favor of the regime. Can we take him and then we give you the floor? Yeah. Frederick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope the connection is stable. I am joining you from the Peace Center of our NGO Relief and Reconciliation in the north of Lebanon, in Akkar. And it is a small NGO we established with Paolo Dall'Olio that you mentioned in 2013. And we have been working here for 10 years, combining peace building with humanitarian aid in response to the Syrian crisis, but involving both Lebanese and Syrian communities in the border region. So do you hear me? It's all good, the connection?
Very good, very good.
Thumbs up, good, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor, for your interesting conference. It's really very relevant topic and very timely because, many people, many discussions are ahead now inside the European Union as well of how to reposition towards the Syrian regime and after the earthquake. So I would like to dig a little bit deeper with regard to the rift you said between the Italian diplomacy and the Vatican diplomacy in the case of Paolo Dall'Oglio. So you mentioned that the Italian government left it almost to the church to deal with it. Within the church, we have a clear division with regard to Paolo Dall'Oglio. Even within the Jesuit order, there is a bit of division, but the position of the order is quite clear to support the search and to support the positioning of Paolo Dall'Oglio in general, also with regard to the Syrian regime. Could you develop a little bit more on the Italian government side? Because you mentioned the personal belongings indeed that were handed over very lately to the family only in 2018, even though Michel Quilot had brought them personally to the Italian embassy in Paris right after the kidnapping of Father Paolo. I think it is worth mentioning that we did our own efforts as our organization is linked with Father Paolo as well. And we did find the intermediaries in Turkey of the negotiations between Daesh and the Italian government. These intermediaries confirmed to us that they had received formal proof of life as early as 2014, which has never been admitted by the Italian government, even though it went to the ambassador. According to them, they even went one step further, that the release of Paolo Dall'Oglio had been agreed in these liberation negotiations. However, the Italian side canceled the operation 2 days before. So the sum was agreed, the amount of money, the transition, how the way it was going to be handed over. So this shocking news, well, we reported it repeatedly, but we have not found an explanation yet. And I don't know if you have any insights how the Italian government was handling the case, but it seems to be that there is something more, something hidden that needs to be investigated. So I don't have all the answers, but I'm asking the question, if you have any, if you know anybody who works on it. And in that regard, it is, I think, quite worth mentioning, and I would like to ask you this question as well, if you have any information about financial deals that are agreed with the Italian government and with non-state actors in Lebanon and Syria. And I'm more specifically referring to, I heard it only verbally from a former Minister of Defense of Italy, who said that there was a deal. There was a deal between the Italian government and Daesh and Hezbollah, a trilateral deal to insert illicit fundings into the international payment system through 2 institutions in Italy, in Napoli and Milano. Do you have any knowledge of that? Can you imagine these things?
I just didn't understand the first word of your sentence of the question. I mean, you say, so this financial agreement, but how did you start the sentence?
According to a former Minister of Defense of Italy, who said orally, and of course off the record, that there was a deal, an arrangement between the Italian authorities, the Italian government, and Daesh and Hezbollah in Lebanon to use Italy for inserting illegal funds into the international payment system. Do you have any knowledge about that? Have you heard about it? Can you imagine it? Thank you.
Okay, so, well, 3 excellent questions, I must say. I'll take them chronologically, if that's okay for you. So the question of I think there's just a small misunderstanding. The meeting of bishops was on the Middle East. So it was all Catholic bishops on the Middle East, okay, which takes place on the end of 2010. The interesting thing is that the Catholic Church back then is recompacting. I mean, let's say they're bringing their forces together. There are 2 events which deeply traumatized, one can say, the Catholic Church and its policy towards the region was the fall of Saddam Hussein, which was a real ally, and the question of the expansion of Daesh or Islamist factions in Iraq, okay, and the violence against Christian communities back then. And these two events in the years 2000 really brought the Catholic Church to the idea we have to bring together our energies, and we have to have one project. I mean, I've not talked about it very much, but this periodical Oasis is really interesting because it's supported by all the different bishops of the region, and it gives a space to different analyses of the situation. But you have the idea, okay, we have one pope, you know, and what the policy of the pope is, that's what we're going to follow. So I think that in the years 2000, there was a stronger hierarchy which was introduced into the way the Catholic Church was going to act in the region. Okay, and you see that with the decision to support the Syrian regime. I mean, it's up downwards, you know. As for your question, this new approach of the Catholic Church, we have one political idea, and we follow down on that. One has systematically seen that in the media in the West. So you regularly had people. I mean, they were not only Catholic, or let's say of the Catholic Christianity. There are also other Christians doing that, but there was systematically one discourse coming out about the question of Syria. And there was no space at all about, on the side of these Christian journalists or whoever they were, there was no description of the repression of the regime. There was no question of what Syria had done in Lebanon to the Christians, for example, you know. There was a complete blackout on the history of the regime. It was just a question of survival of the Christians, and the only guarantee for the survival of the Christians in Syria was the regime. That was a simple equation, and we have that message very early on in the West. The question of secularism is just in opposition to political Islam. I mean, that's how it's understood. It's not democracy. It's not human rights. It's not a civil society. It's not the rule of law. You know, it's against the danger of political Islam. I mean, I'm convinced. You can talk about one can talk of political Catholicism. Absolutely. I think it's unfair on the part of the Catholic Church to criticize Muslim communities to organize politically. That's exactly what the Catholic Church is doing. They have one policy which is very coherent. They've really, let's say, solidified it in the years 2000, and they really export it. I mean, there's an incredible policy of the Pope nowadays to let's say to mend the Muslim communities, Shiites and Sunnis. I mean, the arrogance of an actor like the Pope to think, well, I can come and teach you Muslims how to solve your problems. I mean, that's just incredible. I mean, he's completely forgetting of the disagreements among the Western Christians. I mean, they have a very strong political agenda. They have support in the media, especially in Italy. I mean, this whole idea of an independent state from the Pope has completely disappeared. I mean, what the Pope tells on Sunday, I mean, with the Homilia, is broadcasted in all news channels. the question of Padre Paolo, I mean, it's well, it's I thank you very much for the question, of course, and the whole Italian population keeps the hope alive that we will reunite with Padre Paolo as soon as possible. I have personally met the family of Padre Paolo, and I think that's the most I can tell about what the Italian government is doing. So, I mean, my source is first and foremost the family itself. And they are really in despair. They're really in despair because they feel that the Italian government is not doing anything. There was an invitation in July last year to set up a parliamentary inquiry commission in Italy by the family, and there is an organization of journalists, Giornalisti Amici di Padre Paolo, which works together with the family, and they're masses of common Italians, you know, of people of civil society, academics, who just support this initiative to try to find out why the Italian government is doing so little on the question of Padre Paolo. I mean, my hypothesis is that I mean, as I said, they've in a way that in an easy manner they've pushed the case towards the Catholic Church. I think the Catholic Church sees it as its own domain too. I mean, of course, the Jesuit order is something else, but the whole infrastructure or the institutions of the Vatican is a huge a complex setup. So to a certain extent, they have shifted. I mean, they left it to the Vatican. But I think another element is that Italy, and it's perhaps one of the best example of how cynical Italy can be. I mean, in a way, they've sacrificed Padre Paolo because he's also a complicated personality to manage. He was really capable not only of bringing Christians and Muslims together in Al-Qusayr when he was active in 2012 to reconcile the population and to make the kidnappings of Christians end. He was also extremely efficient in Italy itself to awaken the Italian population to what was happening in Syria. Now, if the Italian government has as priority to keep on you know, managing business as usual, they just don't want this kind of public or political interference. One has to say that the Ministry of Public Foreign Affairs in Italy has, I mean, the minister has moved quite often. So I mean, it has changed quite often. I mean, Luigi Di Maio of the Five-Star Movement was in charge a couple of years, but generally speaking, there has not been a strong minister at that post for quite a while. And of course, that doesn't really help governments to take a stance. But I think that what you say about the idea of financial transition between Hezbollah, Italy, and Daesh. I mean, let's not forget that Daesh has been set up only because the regime made it possible. I mean, there is a real history of collaboration between the regime, which goes back to the American invasion of Iraq, of the Syrian regime working together with Islamist factions to create havoc. Now, and Daesh came to the surface when the regime was managing finally in April 2013 to free the the capital Damascus from a siege set by the Free Syrian Army. I mean, Free Syrian Army and other actors. I mean, that's when Daesh was let's say was announced. The creation of Daesh was announced, and we see until the summer of 2014, there is a real strong collaboration between the regime and Daesh. And that has even happened in 2018 with the attack on the Druze community of Suwaida. So, I mean, that's Hezbollah, Daesh have to exchange money to a certain extent, and that Italy is a good place to do that. It doesn't really surprise me. I mean, I'm to be honest, I don't have any economic information about it, but it wouldn't surprise me. Okay. Plus, what is also very important is that Italy plays a huge role in southern Lebanon. I mean, this connection between the Italians and Hezbollah is extremely strong. And the connection with Iran is extremely strong. So one would have to investigate this more. I mean, perhaps we can stay in touch and you can give more precise information. I think that it's something I also said in Geneva in January. The idea one has when one listens to the news that there are these enemies forever. You know, you have Iran is going to be an enemy forever of Saudi Arabia, or Israel is going to be an enemy forever of Iran. I mean, one sees on the ground that just doesn't work. I mean, the real enemy of all of these actors are the populations. That's my conclusion. I mean, what all these state actors are afraid of are the uprisings. We saw that in Egypt. We saw this in Lebanon here. We've seen it in Syria. You see it with the Palestinians. I mean, there's one thing which mustn't happen: popular uprisings. And I think that the real trauma of the whole region for the state actors is the first Intifada, where a strong actor as Israel has been well, defeated, one could say, if not saved by the Oslo agreements, but was defeated by a popular uprising. And all the state actors in the region see that as a huge risk.
Can't hear you.
Yeah. So Bashar Haidar, go ahead, Bashar, and then you. Okay. Any questions? Yeah. So.
Yeah. Thank you for the interesting, comprehensive journey through the Italian look at the politics in the Levant. My question is about the left in Italy, and how does the left shape and inform the left in various forms and spectrum? So whether in the leftist parties from the center to the far left, or organizations that consider to be leftist, how did they perceive the Syrian revolution and the regime as well? So what shaped that, and to what extent they differ in conclusion from the Catholic committed or the point of view of the shaped by the Vatican or the other right parties? Maybe they have different analysis, but what is the outcome of all of that in terms of how they perceived and still perceive the Syrian revolution and its context?
Sorry, just to be, because I didn't really understand very well. So how does the left perceive the Syrian question? Is that it? Okay.
Yeah, how the left in various spectrums, because the left is not one unit. There might be different leftist party organizations, but in how they perceive that, because it's interesting to know that kind of how the other story. You have the opportunity to ask someone who would probably know about these things.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Johannes, for your really inspiring conference. I have one small question. There was something I couldn't understand very well, so maybe you could clarify for me. You were talking about a critique in Italy about the Italians' aid to North Syria that didn't went to North Syria, and you gave a name and I couldn't. You could repeat. And the other one would be. It's an observation and question that one maybe of the reasons, an element that could be still valid or not in the policy of the Vatican regarding the Middle East will be that for a long time Oriental Christians in the Middle East were also regarded as a force to maintain a force of conservatism against modernism, against modernity. So I guess that maybe when the Vatican kind of supports the regime, even indirectly in the Syrian regime, there is also maybe, I don't know, the ideas of Christianity in the Middle East are also important to, in a more global view, that Christian in Middle East are regarded as a bulwark against modernism, against modernity. Against. How you? My English is not good at good. Yes, against modernity. I mean, there is ideas that there are a force of conservatism in the global Catholicism, in the global Christianity in the world. That Middle East Christians are also have to be supported also because they have a force of conservatism in within the church. It what I saw in the documents in the between the 1920s, 1960s. So I don't know how much it is still how the Vatican see it now. It's I said a little bit, but the period before you were talking about that was kind of a question of observation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe my last question also. As a follower of foreign policies of Europe vis-a-vis the Syrian uprising, but the Arab uprising in general, and I have a very close primary resources from Quai d'Orsay in France, particularly, which we have so many evidence that Europe changed their position vis-a-vis the Syrian opposition because of a kind of a very Israeli lobby that they prefer the regime. Even my informant, who is very influential there, tell you with details about the whole debate in Israel between Netanyahu and Barak, because Barak was outspoken in favor of the opposition, but Netanyahu was, and at certain point the military, Israeli military, they decided that no, it's safer to go with the regime. In any case, the best scenario is to destroy Syria, and let's see what next later on. But it should not be any victory for the opposition. And then he argued that this is really where it was many visits of Israeli official to France, and suddenly everything changed. I mean, the promise to give Stringer change, etc., etc. I mean, it's to arm the opposition, for instance, it was some promises, and suddenly everything is stopped. So if you like, it's a way I'm arguing that we need to disentangle American. Because you keep talking about Italy as a pro-American, etc. I mean, it's more and more you have this an autonomous somehow Israeli lobby, that they have their own interest, which sometimes in collusion with the American and sometimes not necessarily.
Okay.
So I don't know about whether this factor, because this is my question. I know about France that and UK even that this was the case.
Exactly. I'll just donc.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. You can hear me, yeah?
Okay.
Thanks a lot for your critical views and comprehensive discussion on Syria. I really value, I mean, your kind of positionality and the different aspects you brought. Even though, like, and I think you tackled on this, even though like this humanitarian assistant after the earthquake had been like on media, been discussed widely and so on, but also thanks to investigation journalism's reports published recently with Syrian and not Syrian actors, many actors have also highlighted the economic change and also the imports of Syrian phosphates to many European countries and specifically Italy. And this is in a reference to many reports that have started since 2020. So even though, like, I mean, there were like some, yes, a lot of discussions on what is being discussed publicly of the renormalization between Italy and Syria, but there were a lot of economic change and exchanges throughout the previous years that also confirmed this, what you've like brought before. And so I don't think it's like, I don't know, it's a question of normalization or not normalization. This is a diplomatic step that will happen sooner or later. But from the beginning, Italy was opposed to the Syrian revolution, having not supporting like the Syrian actors at the beginning, and also the discussing many like specific example like Father Paolo and so on, who was like very critical and pro-revolution like voice and so on, showed also this reality. But I'm interested if to your in your like understanding and also knowledge, if there are also other local movements or organizations that have a critical voice to Italy policy, foreign policy now in Italy. I mean, Paolo and others we know about and so on, but I'm interested to know or if there are other movements or other voices who are trying to play this role or to try to highlight, I mean, this to be critical voices, I mean, towards Italy foreign policy. Thank you.
Okay, so just quickly for the first question. So Pellitteri, Antonino Pellitteri. So Università di Palermo in Sicily. I think he's just retired. Excellent scholar on Arabic literature. Very bad on Syria, but I mean, he has his opinions. Of course, he knows the country very well. But he just believes the propaganda of the regime. And he's outspoken on that. But I mean, of course, I mean, you can believe what you want. That's no problem. I've sent him a copy of the book. I hope he will write a critical review, because I think it's really good that people as qualified as him enter in discussion about their opinions. You know, I mean, the book, my contribution is one volume in, well, let's say the history of Syria analyzed, and one volume of facts. So, I mean, if you don't agree with my analysis of, you know, how the Constitution of '73 was elaborated or whatever, can we agree on the facts? I mean, you would really have a huge jump in the quality of the discussion in Italy if someone like Pellitteri was prepared to loosen himself, you know. so I mean, wherever that can take place, I mean, I invite him to any open public discussion, because I respect his knowledge, I respect his qualifications, but I believe that he misses on a huge amount of elements about the Syrian situation. It's very interesting what you said about the conservative bulwark for the Catholics back in the 20s to up to the 60s. I think the idea which is now prevailing is that they are at risk. And so it's not, they're not really seen. I mean, the whole idea of conservatism is not sorry? Well, it's not a trend. It's not it's not trendy. I mean, what is trendy in the Catholic Church is, you know, youth gatherings, is lots of media appearances, the whole question of mediation between Shiites and Muslims, making peace with Muslims. I mean, that's the trend, especially with this Pope, because the previous Pope was a bit different. But the interesting thing is that the conservative focus has gained momentum since Vatican II. And we saw that with Ratzinger Pope Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, and this whole organization of defense of Christians, in defense of Christians, is so the conservative are very strong inside the Catholic Church, but they're not open on it. And the message about the Christians in the East is that they need to be protected because they are a free population. That's the reason why secularism is such a theme, you know. They really defend the Christians for going out, having parties, wearing the things they want to wear. I mean, so it's the contrary of conservatism. And that's why they need to be defended, you know. There is much more at stake, of course, but the image is given of not monks, but youth partying. If I can give this as a schematic explanation. I would take the question of voices on foreign policy and the question of the left in Italy together, if that's okay for the two the two people who've asked the question. I mean, my interest in this subject starts with the fact that the Italians don't really have a debate about their foreign policy. I mean, I'm not an Italian, I'm a Swiss national, so I mean, why am I mean, okay, I work in Italy, true, but I mean, why would I be interested in Italian foreign policy? I think it's an important actor. It's a discrete but very important actor, and the Italians really lack the interest in debating this, in having a discussion on the subject. And it's a very complex situation, so it's even more interesting for academics, I believe. If you don't have a discussion I mean, what you can find in the media in Italy is general schematic dynamics of international affairs. They still very much go back to the question of the Cold War. I mean, of course, one could say with the present situation in Ukraine, I mean, the Cold War is back from where it was. I mean, we're back into the Cold War. But even then, I mean, it's not exactly the same, of course. But I mean, the debate in Italy is centered on simplistic interpretations of international affairs. And when one studies international relationships, it's also very bureaucratic. It's a European law. I mean, the real discussions, I mean, the discussion we're having on international affairs, you know, that's you don't really have in in Italy, in the universities. There was a real absence of academic research on the subject of Syria. That's why I did this research, and Italians who are perhaps more competent than I am. I mean, one has to be, you know, honest about one's own limits, etc. Have just not done the work for some kind of odd, I don't know, idea of secrecy or Yeah, this whole they say prudence in French, withholdingness. Yeah, exactly. You see that in the policy, but you also see it in the academics. Okay. So the voices on foreign policy exist. They are mainly, I mean, schematic, you would say. So do we have to support Ukraine? Shouldn't we support Ukraine, for example? And you have a huge bunch of Catholic groups active in Italy. I mean, for example, you had Un Ponte Per, which was an organization put up in the 90s to support the Iraqis, you know. You have this march of Perugia Assisi in the summer, peace march. So I mean, inside the peace movement, for example, in Italy, you have a very strong Catholic component. And they have a voice. I mean, so you can bring that. I mean, you see how the Catholic Church has really reintroduced itself as an actor of policymaking. But again, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is quite immune all of this. You can have some kind of debate. You have some kind of public positioning on the side of the Catholic actors or groups. But then the foreign affairs is quite independent in the way it acts. The question of the left in Italy is a real subject because they used. I mean, I'm talking about the years 2000. They used to exist as a political actor, and they used to determine strongly what the cultural debate would be in Italy. Of course, there used to be a communist party, which was a very important communist party on European scale until the beginning of the 90s. Then the Communist Party split. Still, a lot of people identified with this Rifondazione Comunista, which was created afterwards. But next to that trend, you have a strong socialist tradition in Italy. You have a strong anarchist tradition in Italy. You have a leftist Catholic trend. So the left, politically and socially, used to be very strong, and they were also capable of influencing strongly the cultural debate in Italy. I mean, it's perhaps just enough to think about of the editor Feltrinelli, who really made huge contributions to radical debates on the side of the left until he was murdered at the beginning of the 70s, you know, by the Italian secret services. Or the right-wing agents or whoever they were. But the left in Italy was a cultural actor, was a social actor, was a political actor. That up until the fall of the Berlusconi government in 2006. I mean, there was a huge opposition to Berlusconi back then. Then you had the Prodi, second Prodi government, 2006, 2008. Then Berlusconi came back to power. And then basically the political leadership of the social democratic trend of what used to be the Communist Party sacrificed the left as a political force. So they made compromises with Berlusconi and his fellow his partners, basically the left has disappeared from parliament to a large extent. I mean, something remains, but it has nothing really of a weight which it used to have. And I think, to be very honest, I think that the positioning of the left on the question of the Arab Spring, and in particular the question of the Syrian uprising, has really brought the vitality of the left to an end. Because I tried, together with many other people, to explain what was happening on the ground in Syria to the leftist organizations. And of course, the leftist organization, that is the labor movement. So the unions, you have the student movement, you have the political parties, you have intellectuals, you have the solidarity movement with the Palestinians. I mean, it's very diverse, you know, what the left is in a country like Italy. But there was no strong or real capacity on the side of the leftist actors in Italy to interact with what was happening in Syria, or even what was happening in Egypt. I mean, it's not only a question of knowledge of language. It's also that if they don't have, and it's in a way, it's a Catholic scheme. If they don't have someone from above explaining, as an authority would do, what the good stance is, then the common militant is lost. So a lot of people just waited for Il Manifesto or some political party or some labor union to take a strong stance on the question of Syria, which these actors didn't do because they thought that Syria was going to protect the Palestinians. I mean, you know, so the people were just left in the cold. And nowadays, there is a real difficulty even to open a discussion among the left, inside of among the leftist organizations on the subject of Syria. It's a taboo, you know. It's like we cannot talk about the war in Ukraine, or we cannot talk about the war in Vietnam, or whatever. It's a taboo. We don't talk about it. And of course, I mean, when the left reaches that point, it has dissolved itself. The interesting counterexample is the Kurdish issue. I mean, the Kurdish issue has taken up a huge dimension inside the leftist organizations in Italy. So everyone is talking about the Kurdish issue. No one is talking about Syria and the Syrians of the Kurdish population inside Syria. I mean, no one is talking about Rushdin. I mean, the neighborhood of Kurds in Damascus. You know.
We need to wrap up.
We need to wrap up. So the last, no, I mean, just to come back to the question of Israel, which is extremely important, of course. I believe that the Israelis have a strong lobby also inside the Kurdish movement. So that's a connecting element. And it's very interesting what you said about the discussion about between Barak and Netanyahu. I don't believe it's Israeli military which decided. I think it's Netanyahu who decided to strengthen the Syrian regime. The murder which happened here in Beirut on Wissam al-Hassan, you know, the general, still needs to be clarified. I think that the Israelis have something to explain about that, because it's like a miracle. After that, the Hezbollah and Iran had a free game inside Syria. So I don't know to what extent they really have, the Israeli lobby is that strong inside the French and the British government. I mean, the British government, conservative, of course, they have a lot of influence. I think the French had their own approach. But I mean, the Germans are strongly influenced by the Israelis, that's no doubt. But what was really of a huge impact for the French and the British was that the Americans didn't want the regime to fall. I mean, that the Americans officially said, well, we want the end of Bashar al-Assad. But then if you look at what they're doing for Ukraine, I mean, it's ridiculous what they did for the Syrian uprising, you know. And I mean, that has been identified by an author like Antoine Mariotti, who's written extensively on that. I mean, how the Obama just left the Syrians in the cold. I mean, you know, you have the votes at the British Parliament after the attack of the Ghouta on the 21st of August 2013. The British Parliament deciding not to support intervention, Obama renouncing the intervention, and the Pope the following day organizing an international day of prayer. The guy has never done that before, you know, and it's the Pope waiting to understand what the Americans are going to do, and then to decide on taking a public stance. You have the same with this position taken by the bishops in Damascus on the 29th of March 2011, so first actor ever. It happens 2 days after Hillary Clinton says that Bashar al-Assad on CNN television on Sunday morning, that Bashar al-Assad is a Democrat. And he's going to make reforms. So it's really the disappointment. I mean, Israel had a clear stance. I've written a whole chapter in my book on that. I mean, please read it. I mean, because Israel is not neutral, absolutely not. They want Assad to stay, and they want Syria to collapse, both. But the question of the United States, it's a taboo, and the Syrian opposition has had a lot of difficulty discussing that.
With this word, I would like to thank you again, Johannes, for your talk, and thank you for your participation. Tomorrow at the same time at noon, we have another talk organized by CAMES and PSPA about the tale of two colleges, about EUB and the one in Turkey. And we will see a lot of who has been funded in the same time, but they have absolutely different trajectories. So join us tomorrow in West Hall, Auditorium A. Thank you. Yeah, and just to say that really on behalf of the Department of History of Sheikh Zayed, Chair of Arabic and Islamic Studies and CAMES, we would like to thank you so much. Yeah.